Hey everyone, it's Steve from the garden. In today's video, I'm going to start planting a cover crop in the space where the onions used to be, and it sits alongside the tomatoes here. Now the cover crop I'm going to be planting is buckwheat, which is a very fast growing warm season cover crop, and usually it finishes up in 30 to 40 days, which is perfect since this is the end of the season for me. If you've never seen buckwheat seed before, this is what it looks like. Each of the seeds is pretty good size, which makes it easy to plant. And I'm not going to worry about the planting density. I'm just going to throw it on there pretty thick so that we have a good stand. All I'm really going to do is just go ahead and scatter this around. Again, I'm not worried about overplanting on this. If it don't compete itself, that's fine. As long as I get a good thick cover of the cover crop. I'm just going to take some of my compost and put it down in a light layer. I don't need to put a lot in here. I just need to put enough so that we get good germination on the seeds. I have all the compost laid down and spread out. And I also watered it in to help the germination get started. Now just to know, I did not add any fertilizers to this. This is a cover crop. I expect it to be able to germinate and improve the soil without having to add extra nutrients to it. The compost itself does have some nutrients, so it will get something in there. And that compost will also help retain more of the moisture into the soil. And in a few days, once this germinates, we'll come back and take a look, see how it's doing. This is the buckwheat after 11 days, or roughly 1/3 of the way through its growth cycle. The plants are now 3 to 4 inches tall, and they form a nice thick mat to cover the soil. It's now been 3 weeks since I planted the buckwheat. You can see it's getting quite tall, and it is just starting to flower. So it won't be long before the bees and other pollinators start coming in here and enjoying this. And we'll check back in another week. Buckwheat is now 4 weeks old and it's fully in flowering. You can see some of the insects are taking advantage of it. Even the ants are getting in on the action. The buckwheat's now at 5 weeks. You can see it's grown tall and it's kind of sprawling out a little bit. And this is what I'm looking for, is right here is where it's starting to produce the little seed heads. So it's time for me to cut this down and get this cover crop terminated. For terminating the cover crop, I want to cut it right above the soil surface. That way I can leave the roots in the ground, which the roots are where the microbes congregate around. And also leaving the roots allows me to build carbon in the soil as those roots break down. And as I cut all this vegetation down, I want to leave it right on the soil surface, because that will add more organic matter as I go on to the next step. Now, for actually doing the cutting, I could use something like a weed whacker, which would certainly cut it down real quick, but weed whackers tend to make a lot of mess and they get stuff everywhere. So my preferred method to cut down the cover crop is to use the hedge trimmer. Hedge trimmer cuts through this stuff really pretty fast. It's not messy, and it just makes it very quick and easy and efficient. Okay, the buckwheat's all been cut down. It really only took, a few minutes to go and do that. And then I just kind of redistribute the vegetation so it makes like an even layer across the bed. Now this stuff is pretty thick, so it would help block any weeds from growing up. And with it being, late September here, we're probably not going to get too many more new weeds growing up at this time anyways. Which brings up another option I could have used for terminating it, which is this won't survive the winter, so I could have just let it winter kill all on its own. And that would have been pretty effective, except I probably would have wanted to start my planting a little bit later so that I don't have any viable seeds that would overwinter potentially. So my next step here is to go through and put a layer of compost over this. That'll help this material break down faster and build up the bed and enrich it for planting next year. I have a couple buckets of compost. So I really only need to put, maybe an inch or so on top of this. And just kind of spread dirt around. Yeah, I got a worm in the compost. That's a good sign. Compost is all in place. The thickness probably came out closer to 2 inches instead of 1. But I also wanted to kind of top up the bed so it's at the top of the where the wood is at. So the last step is to cover this space now with a woven ground cover. And I'll weigh this down with some bricks and logs and stuff. And the reason for that is if I cover it, then I know weed seeds are not going to get in there. And if anything is still growing in through that compost, it'll kill that off too. Woven ground cover is in place and weighed down with the bricks. With the woven ground cover in place, this cover crop is now terminated and it'll sit over the winter time and all that vegetation will just break down, and next spring when I'm ready to plant, you won't even know it was there. But all that vegetation, organic matter, and those roots that add carbon to the soil will be enriching the soil for next spring. On the far side of the bed, that's where I'm planting garlic this year. And I'll cover that in a separate video. Let me know if you're growing any cover crops this year, and if so, what you're growing. And until then, I hope you enjoyed. Hope you got something out of this, and we'll see you on the next one.